The kettle hadn't even warmed yet, but I could already hear the gravel shifting on the driveway. That sound, it used to mean he was home. Safe. Tired. Ready to step into the quiet with me. But that evening, when I looked through the kitchen window, the light caught the windshield just right, and for a second I couldn't see his face at all. Just silhouettes. 4 of them. Laughter spilled out the moment the car door opened. Soft, unfamiliar laughter that didn't belong to us. And I remember thinking, this can't be my house anymore. The sun was low, brushing everything in that strange gold that makes ordinary things look borrowed. Our driveway, the one he and I sealed during that too hot summer, looked brighter than it should have. Like someone had polished it for company. I stayed behind the glass, one hand pressed lightly to the counter beside me. The surface felt cool. Solid. More real than anything outside the window. He stepped out first, stretching like he'd returned from an adventure. His jacket hung loose, unbothered. And then she came out, the woman I only knew from the way he said her name too softly, followed by 2 people who carried themselves like they had every right to be here. Her parents, maybe. I didn't know. There was no script for a moment like that. They held boxes. Not suitcases. Boxes. The kind you bring when you're not just visiting. The kind people tape shut with intention. I didn't move. I didn't wave. I didn't breathe loud enough for the house to hear. Because something told me this moment wasn't meant for me. Inside the kitchen, the refrigerator hummed in that tired way old appliances do. The overhead light buzzed. The house felt restless, like it was waiting to see what I'd do next. But I couldn't step outside. Not yet. Not when their voices sounded like they belonged more than mine ever could. He looked toward the house once, hand on the trunk, mouth parted like he might say something. But he didn't. Not to me. Not to the door. Not to the walls that once held our whispers. Instead, he turned to them. The woman brushing her hair behind her ear, the older couple smiling with polite excitement, and he laughed. A full, warm laugh I hadn't heard from him in months. The kind he used to save for me. Her mother held a box with both arms, and when he moved to help her, she swatted at him playfully. It was so gentle, so familiar, like they'd rehearsed this. My fingers curled against the counter. The laminate was smooth, worn from years of chopping, kneading, leaning. I traced the faint scratches near the edge, leftovers from holiday dinners and late-night snacks. The history of us. The front door was only a few steps away, but I found myself walking deeper inside instead. Past the dining table, where we shared quiet breakfasts. Down the hallway, where the floor still creaked in the same 2 places. Into the living room filled with a kind of dusk that softens everything if you let it. I pressed my palm flat against the wall. It felt cooler than it should have. Like the house had already started turning away from me. Outside, someone laughed again, lighter this time. A sound carried easily through open spaces. A sound that made the rooms around me feel suddenly smaller. I walked through the house like a guest, touching surfaces I used to move past without thinking. The edge of the couch, the mantel, the side of the doorframe where his shoulder used to bump every time he walked through too quickly. Each touch felt like a question I didn't want answered. In the hallway, the late afternoon light spilled through the blinds, leaving narrow stripes across the floor. Dust floated through them, moving slowly, like the air itself was hesitant. I stepped into our bedroom, or what used to be ours. The bed was made, but the sheets looked unfamiliar. Stiffer. Cooler. Like they were waiting for someone else to pull them back. I sat on the edge and listened. Not to him. Not to them. But to the house. It's strange how a place can shift without moving. How the air changes first. Then the sound. Then the feeling in your own chest. Through the window, I could see the car still parked crookedly in the drive, boxes stacked neatly beside it. The woman's father, or whoever he was, patted my husband's shoulder in a way that spoke of comfort. Approval. Belonging. I thought of all the mornings I spent opening this window for fresh air. All the evenings I closed it again to keep out the cold. And I wondered, quietly, the way one wonders about forgotten dreams. How long does a home stay yours when someone else has already moved into the space your heart used to fill? I stood in the doorway of the bedroom, hand resting on the frame, feeling the faint warmth where sunlight touched the wood. Below me, the floor creaked, the same soft groan it had made for years. But it sounded different now, like it remembered something I didn't, or forgot something I thought would last. Outside, car doors shut, feet shuffled, voices drifted toward the porch. The house held its breath with me, and in that tight, golden silence, I understood something I couldn't ignore. This place, these walls, this air, they weren't waiting for me anymore. Somewhere downstairs, a key turned in a lock, and the question settled in my chest, cold and certain. Was I the one returning, or the one being replaced? The morning light came in thin, watery stripes, the kind that never really warm a room. I sat on the living room floor with a shoebox balanced on my knees, the cardboard edges gone soft from years of being opened, closed, and tucked away again. When I lifted the lid, a faint smell rose, dust, old paper, something like sun-bleached summers. The photographs inside were curled at the edges, their colors fading to that muted memory blue. I reached for the first one, and even before my fingers touched it, I knew it would hurt. Some pictures don't let you forget, even when you're no longer in them. I spread the photos across the carpet, arranging them in clumsy rows. Vacations, birthdays, anniversaries, years of smiles I used to think were real. In one, I stood at the edge of a lake, the sun setting just behind me. He had taken that shot, told me to turn slightly, to pretend I wasn't looking at him. I remember laughing, water still dripping from my hair, my hands cold from the wind. The me in that picture looked relaxed, weightless. I touched her face with the tip of my finger, wondering if she would recognize me now. Outside, children's voices rose and fell. Laughter, arguments, the thud of a ball hitting pavement. Their noise drifted in through the slightly open window, but inside the house, everything stayed still, silent in that heavy, familiar way. I picked up another photograph. A birthday. My 32nd. There were candles on a cake, leaning sideways from the heat. He stood next to me, smiling wide enough for both of us. I looked at our faces side by side and felt a small gap widen in my chest, a space where something used to live. In all these moments, I was there but not really there. Not the way he was. Not the way she probably is now. I pulled out an older album, one with a cracked spine, and a strip of transparent tape holding the cover in place. It opened to a spread of photos from a beach trip. Not a big trip, just a weekend thing. We'd taken it in the early years, before life settled and stiffened around us. There was a picture of him holding a kite, struggling against the wind. One of me wearing sunglasses too big for my face. One of us lying on a blanket we spread too close to the waterline. But when I looked closely, I realized something unsettling. In almost every shot, I was slightly blurred. He was clear, sharply focused, his smile anchored right in the center. But me? I was just a shape beside him. A presence. An outline. My hands began to tremble, so I pressed them against the carpet until the feeling passed. The children outside had grown louder. Someone yelled for a friend to wait up. Someone else laughed from the far side of the street. Their world felt bright, full, echoing with the kind of innocence I used to believe could save anything. But inside this house, even the air felt faded. Even the walls felt uninterested in holding sound. I slid one photograph toward me, an anniversary shot. We were dressed up, standing in front of a restaurant whose name I can no longer recall. He had his arm around my waist. I had a polite smile, the kind worn more out of ritual than joy. Maybe I ignored the signs. Maybe the signs ignored me. There was one picture I avoided, buried at the bottom. Our wedding photo. The only one we framed, the only one that ever hung on the wall. When I finally picked it up, the frame felt heavier than I remembered. The glass had a small crack in the corner. I wasn't sure when that happened. Maybe I'd done it by accident during one of my cleaning days. Maybe it happened when he left for that trip. We stood under a tree the day it was taken. Late spring. The leaves were full overhead, and sunlight trickled through them like warm rain. We looked young. We looked hopeful. But as I stared, something felt wrong, off, misplaced, like a book returned to the wrong shelf. His eyes weren't on me. Not even then. He was smiling toward the camera, or maybe at whoever was behind it, the photographer he insisted we hire. But I, naive and earnest, had been smiling directly at him. I traced the outline of my younger self's dress. The curve of my arm looped through his. I whispered, "What were you thinking?" But the photo didn't answer. Photos never do. They only hold what we refuse to see in real time. The children's laughter turned into a distant echo. The house exhaled a long, tired breath through the vents. And I wondered, truly wondered, if memories still belonged to me, or if they had already shifted into something he shared with someone else. Someone who wouldn't blur in the frame. I gathered the photographs slowly, stacking them by size, slipping them back into the shoebox one by one. Each picture felt like a tiny goodbye, a quiet surrender. When I closed the lid, the room seemed larger, emptier in a way I hadn't noticed before. The children outside had run farther down the street now. Their voices barely reached the window. The silence left behind felt familiar and not at all comforting. I placed the box on the coffee table, but it looked out of place, like it belonged to someone else's life. I touched the lid once more, lightly, almost tender, and a question settled into my bones, soft but heavy. If the past forgets you, what power does remembering still hold? The house didn't answer. It only listened, the way old houses do, when they've already chosen who they belong to. The afternoon light slipped into the hallway in thin, delicate bands, as if the sun itself was unsure about entering. I stood at the threshold of the first bedroom, my hand resting lightly on the frame, the wood warm beneath my fingertips. The room was empty, stripped bare, yet it felt crowded with something I couldn't name. Every sound echoed too clearly. The tick of the vent, the soft settling of the house, my own breath catching in my chest. When I stepped inside, the floorboard beneath me gave a small, tired creak. It was the kind of sound a home makes when it's remembering someone or forgetting them. I walked slowly, drifting from one room to the next like a person wandering through a museum of their own life. All the doors were open, as if the house wanted me to see everything, every corner, every shadow, every forgotten piece of air. In the second bedroom, the scent hit me first. A faint trace of lavender perfume, the kind I used to wear in the early years. It clung to the closet door, to the fabric of the curtains I never replaced, to the small indentation on the windowsill where I once set a candle that dripped wax onto the paint. I touched the mark lightly, my fingers brushing the uneven surface. The wax had hardened years ago, but it still felt warm in memory. Sunlight fell across the opposite wall in slanted, golden stripes. Dust drifted gently through the beams, each speck floating like it had nowhere else to go. I watched them for a long time, the way one watches a snow globe after shaking it, waiting to see where everything finally settles. But nothing settled. Not the dust. Not the light. Not the hollow feeling inside me. From outside came the distant sound of a dog barking, followed by the faint rumble of a passing car. Normal sounds. Everyday sounds. Yet they only made the silence inside the house feel deeper. Hungrier. I paused in the doorway, imagining voices that weren't mine, footsteps that didn't match my rhythm. And the thought clung to me like damp fabric. This place is ready for someone else. I stepped into what used to be the guest room, though guest was a generous word. No one had stayed here in years. The carpet was slightly flattened where the bed once stood, the faint outline visible like a ghost refusing to leave. I knelt down and pressed my palm against the floor. It was cool, almost cold, as if the room stayed untouched even in summer. A space paused in time. But then something shifted in my mind, quiet but sharp. I pictured boxes stacked neatly along the wall. A new bed frame carried up the stairs by unfamiliar hands. Children running in and out, leaving trails of toys and fingerprints. A woman rearranging the closet, humming to herself while placing folded clothes on shelves I had emptied with trembling hands. Her parents maybe standing in the doorway, praising the potential of the room. Praising a space I once filled with quiet hopes. The image felt too real, too possible, too immediate. I rose to my feet slowly, brushing dust from my palms, though there was none there. The hallway stretched before me, narrow and dim. My footsteps sounded louder now, echoing in a way they never had when the house felt full. I paused outside the master bedroom, our room, and swallowed against the tightness crawling up my throat. The doorknob felt colder than the rest of the house, a small, metallic truth. When I pushed the door open, the room let out a long, low sigh, the sound of a place bracing for change. The master bedroom looked different in its emptiness. Not physically. Nothing had changed, but the emptiness had taken shape, like a thin fog settling against the walls. The afternoon had slipped toward evening, and the sunlight was dimmer now, stretching long shadows across the furniture. Shadows that didn't belong to anything. Shadows that reached toward me like slow-moving hands. I walked to the window and tugged the curtain back, letting in the last amber light of the day. It spilled across the bedspread, highlighting a faint indentation on the side where he used to sleep. For a moment, I almost reached out to smooth it, out of habit, out of longing, but I didn't. The house creaked again, a soft, unsettled groan, and the sound echoed in the hollow of my chest, as if it were speaking, but not to me, not anymore. I imagined them here too, her brushing her hair in front of the mirror, her mother commenting on the paint color, her father checking the window frame for drafts, my husband, no, the man I used to know, telling them where the light hits best in the morning. The images were intrusive, vivid, territorial. They filled the room the way shadows do at dusk, expanding, multiplying, overtaking. I stepped back until my shoulders touched the wall. The cool plaster steadied me, just enough. And in that moment, something inside me whispered a truth I wasn't ready for. A home doesn't wait for you. It moves on long before you do. Night slipped in quietly. The last of the sunlight vanished from the floor, replaced by long, uncertain shadows stretching across the carpet. I stood in the center of the bedroom, surrounded by shapes and stillness, listening to the deepening silence settle like dust. The house felt foreign, occupied, not by people but by possibilities. As the darkness grew, the doorway seemed farther away, a tunnel leading out of a place I no longer recognized. I stepped back into the hall, the faint scent of lavender trailing behind me like a memory that refused to fade. The house held its breath, and I held mine. A question rose in the silence, soft but steady. How do you reclaim a space that already belongs to ghosts of the future? The house didn't answer. It only waited. The wind had been tapping at the windows since morning, a soft, restless knocking that felt almost personal. I was passing through the living room when something caught my eye, just a sliver of white beneath the couch cushion, barely visible, like a secret trying not to be found. I froze. For a moment, the whole room seemed to hold its breath with me. I reached down slowly, the fabric brushing against my knuckles, the air turning tight around my ribs. When my fingers closed around the edge of the paper, I already knew who it was from. Some things carry a weight before you even lift them. I sat on the edge of the couch, the cushions sinking softly beneath me. The note lay in my hands, folded twice, not haphazardly, not carelessly. He had taken his time. He always took his time when the truth was something he didn't want to say out loud. The living room was dim, the sky outside a muted gray that pressed its color into the walls. The lamp in the corner hummed faintly, casting a warm pool of light over the coffee table, but it couldn't soften the cold feeling curling around my spine. For a long moment, I just stared at his handwriting on the front, my name written slowly, letters spaced as if he were afraid they might touch. Claire. A simple word, but in his script, it felt like a boundary. I traced the edge of the paper with my thumb, breathing in the faint scent of dust and the lingering cologne he favored. The room felt both familiar and foreign, as if it had shifted just slightly when I wasn't looking. Outside, the wind swept against the windows again. A low, hollow sound. It reminded me of a door half opened, or someone whispering from the other side. I closed my eyes. Part of me didn't want to open the note at all. Another part already knew I would. Secrets don't stay folded forever. The paper unfolded with a soft crackle, the creases giving way reluctantly. It was a short note, barely a handful of sentences, but the words felt heavy on the page, like ink pressed into the fibers rather than written on top. Claire, I'm sorry. I need you to understand some things. I didn't expect this trip to change what it did. I didn't expect to hurt you the way I have. I stopped reading there, the lines swimming slightly as my eyes stung. Not from tears, not yet, but from something sharper. Recognition, maybe. Resignation. His handwriting was steady, almost neat, like he'd practiced what he wanted to say on another sheet of paper first. Like this was the version that concealed more than it revealed. I read on. I know you deserve an explanation. I'll give it to you when I'm back. Please try to hear me out before you decide anything. No love, no warmth, just that single initial, written with a finality he probably didn't realize he'd put on the page. I held the note between my fingers, feeling the slight tremble in my hands. The words didn't surprise me, but the tone did, careful, measured, like someone walking across thin ice. The wind struck the window harder this time, the pain vibrating in its frame. A warning, or maybe a reminder. Something inside me shifted. A small, quiet movement, but unmistakable. I read the note again, slower this time. Each sentence felt like a carefully arranged stone, set just so to look steady even if the ground beneath it was cracked. He wanted me to wait. He wanted me to understand. He wanted room for his explanation, his guilt, his version of the truth. But nowhere in those few lines did he ask how I felt. Nowhere did he say what he wanted for us. Only what he hoped I wouldn't decide while he was gone. My fingers tightened around the paper. It crinkled softly, bending under the pressure. A strange feeling rose in me then, not anger, not exactly. More like a slow untying, as if the knot I'd been carrying in my chest for so long had finally loosened just enough to let air in. I looked around the living room. The couch he picked out, the lamp I'd chosen, the rug we both pretended to agree on. Objects that once felt shared now looked separate, belonging to no one, belonging to whoever had the courage to claim them. The note trembled in my hand again, but this time it wasn't from fear. It was from something close to clarity, something like the first breath after a long dive underwater. Outside, the wind wailed against the siding, a sharp, restless sound that made the whole house shiver. It felt like the weather knew what I hadn't yet said aloud. Maybe a few sentences could change the course of a life. If the life was already teetering at the edge. I folded the note slowly, smoothing each crease with the edge of my thumb. Not to preserve it, but to contain it, to keep it as small as it deserved to be. The wind rattled the windows again, softer this time, like it had tired itself out. The living room settled into stillness, broken only by the hum of the lamp and my own quiet breath. I slipped the note back under the cushion where I'd found it, the fabric rising around it like a closing hand. And as I stood, something in me felt taller, straighter, less afraid. I walked toward the hallway, each step measured, deliberate. Behind me, the house exhaled, long and low, like it knew a decision had already started forming. I didn't know what came next, but the question lingered softly in my mind, like a door cracking open. What if I finally chose myself? The phone rang in that hollow way it does when the house is too quiet, when every sound seems to echo off walls that have held too many secrets. I almost didn't answer. The receiver felt heavier than it should have, warm from the sunlight sneaking through the blinds. On the other end, a woman's voice introduced herself. Bright, practiced, polite. She spoke about listings and market timing, her words tumbling neatly into place. But the moment she said, "Have you ever considered selling?" the air around me stilled. Not dramatically. Just enough for something inside me to tilt, like a picture frame quietly coming loose from the nail. I stood in the kitchen after the call ended, the dial tone replaced by a soft hum in my ears. The real estate agent's voice still floated around the edges of my mind, too clean, too efficient, too certain. She talked as if she already knew what I wanted. Maybe she did. Maybe this house had been trying to tell me long before she said the words aloud. The afternoon light filtered through the window in long, thin bands, golden at the edges, dust dancing lazily through each beam. The countertop beneath my palm felt familiar, the laminate worn smooth from years of steady use. My hand traced the shallow grooves, the small burn mark we never admitted was from a forgotten skillet, the faint outline of a coffee ring he always meant to scrub off. I found myself imagining someone else standing there. A stranger. A woman I'd never meet placing her mug in the same spot, wiping the same surface with a cloth that didn't belong to me. The thought wasn't painful. Not exactly. Just distant, like watching a life through frosted glass. The house was steady around me, but it felt like it was listening, waiting, breathing in that patient way it sometimes did when the sun was low and the rooms were quiet. I exhaled slowly, and the silence seemed to exhale back. I walked through the kitchen doorway and into the living room, each step soft on the wooden floors that remembered more than I did. The cushions looked undisturbed, still holding the faint imprint of my knees from the day before, when I'd found his note buried underneath. I didn't dare pick them up. Not today. Instead, I wandered toward the hallway, letting my fingers brush the wall as I passed. The paint felt cool under my fingertips, textured in certain places where we'd never bothered to sand properly. I remembered how he once swore he'd fix every imperfection in this house. And I remembered the night I realized he wouldn't. Room by room, the house greeted me the way old friends sometimes do, with a softness tinged with resignation. The guest room held the faint scent of lavender from a sachet I'd tucked into the dresser years ago. The light slanted across the bedspread, making a quiet checkerboard on the faded quilt. The hall closet creaked when I opened it, its hinges stiff with disuse. Even the coats hanging inside looked tired of pretending they still had somewhere to go. When I stepped into our bedroom, the air felt heavier. Not suffocating, just thick, like a room that knew too much to pretend anymore. I imagined another couple moving through the space. New shoes on the rug. New laughter against the walls. People who didn't know the stories this house carried. And to my own surprise, the idea didn't sting. It sounded possible. I returned to the kitchen, but this time it felt like I was seeing it differently, like someone had shifted the lens on a camera. The cabinets weren't memories anymore. They were wood. Simple, unburdened wood. The sink didn't hold the echo of our Sunday mornings. It was just porcelain. Cold, indifferent, honest. I leaned both hands against the countertop, letting my weight settle. The house felt still, almost expectant. For months I'd felt trapped in this place, its corners too sharp, its memories too loud, its shadows stretching longer than they should. But in that moment, standing there with sunlight painting my shoulders, I realized the house wasn't trapping me. I was. And the phone call, it didn't feel like an intrusion anymore. It felt like an open window. A breeze slipping in where the air had grown stale. The agent's voice replayed softly in my mind. "We can move at your pace, Claire. Whenever you're ready." Ready. It was a strange word. A word I hadn't used in a long time. I looked around again. At the kitchen table with one chair always pulled slightly aside. At the stack of unopened mail. At the marks on the floor from where we'd moved the fridge last summer. Everything in the room seemed to shift subtly, like the house was tilting its head. As if it were whispering a quiet approval. As if it were saying, "It's all right to go." And for the first time, I believed it. I stepped toward the back door, unlocking it with a soft click I knew by heart. The air outside smelled like late afternoon, warm earth, a hint of pine, the faint sweetness of something blooming unseen. A breeze slipped past me, brushing my cheek like a gentle hand. Behind me, the kitchen settled into its familiar silence. But it wasn't heavy anymore. Not crowded. Not demanding. It felt like a goodbye waiting to be spoken. I closed my eyes and let the wind move through the doorway, stirring the curtains, lifting the corners of the room. It felt like the house was exhaling for both of us. Maybe letting go of a place doesn't erase who you were. Maybe it gives you room to become someone new. And standing there at the threshold, I found myself wondering, what if leaving is the first real thing I've done in years? The first box sat open on the living room floor, its cardboard flaps wide like a mouth waiting to swallow pieces of my life. I knelt beside it, listening to the soft creak of the house settling around me, the kind of sound that feels almost like breathing. The evening light filtered through the curtains in faint, dusty ribbons. It touched the edges of the objects I'd laid out: a plate, a worn paperback, a ceramic vase with a chipped rim. Things that had once felt ordinary. Now they pulsed with memories I didn't ask for. I reached for the plate first, and the room seemed to lean closer. It was strange how packing didn't start with a decision. It started with a quiet pull, soft, persistent, like the instinct to tidy before guests arrive. Except no one was coming. No one would sit in these chairs again after I was gone, at least not anyone who knew what was said here, or what wasn't. The plate felt cool under my palm, smoother in the center where countless meals had passed across its surface. Sunday dinners, midnight leftovers, arguments softened by the clatter of forks. I turned it over slowly, as if I might find some message on the underside, something that could explain where things had gone wrong. But it was just ceramic.
White. Plain.
A plate that had held more than its share of moments, most of which would never be captured in any photograph. I wrapped it in paper, the crinkling sound sharp in the stillness. The house seemed to listen to that, too. One plate turned into two, two into four. A rhythm formed: lift, pause, wrap, place, like a song I didn't know I remembered. But every few items I had to stop.
Breathe.
Let the ache in my chest settle before I reached for something else. Packing wasn't supposed to hurt, but somehow it did. I moved on to the bookshelf next, not with purpose, just because the path between the cardboard box and the shelf felt like the next step my feet were willing to take. My fingers hovered over the spines. Some books had faded covers, worn edges from being read and reread. Others were pristine, bought with good intentions that never made it past the first chapter. I pulled down a novel with a folded corner on page 163. He used to tease me for bending pages instead of using bookmarks. Said it was marking time the wrong way. I smiled faintly at the memory, but it disappeared as quickly as it came. The room felt full of ghosts, gentle ones, quiet ones, hovering in the space between one object and the next. A small vase sat on the highest shelf, a gift from an anniversary long enough ago that I couldn't remember which number. The glaze was cracked in one spot, spiderwebbing out like frost on glass. I held it carefully, turning it in my hands. It felt heavier than it should have, as if the years pressed down into the clay. I thought about leaving it behind, about letting the future owners decide its worth. But something in me resisted, a tiny tug that insisted this piece, too, held a story, one I wasn't quite ready to abandon. The box waited at my feet, open and patient. I wasn't sure I was. As the hours stretched on, the boxes grew taller, their presence reshaping the room. What had once been a home was slowly becoming a shell, emptier in some ways, clearer in others. I reached for a framed photo we kept on the side table. The glass was smudged along the bottom edge, my fingerprints probably, from dusting it more frequently than I'd ever admit.
It was a picture of us at the lake.
His hand around my waist, my smile too wide, too bright. The kind of smile people wear when they believe time is something that belongs to them. I traced the outline of my face in the image. It felt like touching a stranger. The grief didn't hit all at once. It came quietly, rising in soft waves that lapped at the edges of my ribs. Not loud enough to drown me, just enough to remind me what I was losing. I wrapped the photo slowly, the paper folding around it like a shroud. When I placed it in the box, something inside me settled. Not healed, just arranged. The act of packing had shifted. It wasn't about leaving anymore. It was about reclaiming, piece by piece, the parts of me scattered across every surface in the house. Still, the emptiness grew with every item I put away. A hollow inside the walls. A hollow inside me. The past wasn't gone, but it was loosening its grip. By nightfall, the living room was lined with boxes stacked in uneven towers, their shadows stretching long across the floorboards. The house felt quieter than it ever had, like it was waiting for me to finish a sentence I'd only just started. I sat on the edge of the couch, hands resting on my knees, dust settling softly in the air around me. The silence wasn't comforting, but it wasn't threatening anymore either. Each box held a story, a moment, a reminder. And though I had packed them away, The weight of them remained, a soft thrum beneath my skin. I stared at the nearest box, its lid still open, half filled, half decided. And I wondered, almost whispering to myself, how do you carry a past you're finally willing to put down? The morning was thin and pale, the kind of light that makes everything look a little colder than it feels. I stepped outside with the box in my arms, meaning only to place it in the trunk, nothing more. But the street was already awake. Quietly, curiously. Curtains shifted in windows. A screen door clicked open 2 houses down. Someone's wind chimes whispered in the breeze, almost like they were clearing their throat before speaking. I hadn't even closed the trunk before I felt it, the soft, unmistakable weight of eyes resting on me. Not harsh, just watching, like the whole neighborhood wanted to understand something I barely understood myself. I used to love mornings on the street, when the air still smelled like dew and fresh coffee, and the world moved slow enough for a person to believe they were part of it. Children's bikes leaned against fences. Sprinklers whispered across lawns. Dogs barked with the certainty of creatures that trusted everything would stay as it was. But that morning, the street felt different. Like a small town in an old film where everyone knows a secret but waits for the right moment to gather around and talk about it. I set the empty box by the porch steps and wiped my palms on my jeans. Across the road, Mrs. Pennington stood beside her mailbox, pretending to sort envelopes she'd already looked through twice. Her eyes flicked up and away, as if she couldn't decide whether to greet me or give me space. Farther down, the Henderson twins whispered each other, their voices low, their heads bent together like 2 halves of a closed book. They weren't unkind people. None of them were. But pity has a way of settling into people's faces, even when they're trying not to show it. The street felt too small, all of a sudden, too observant, too aware of me, standing there with a life half-packed and nowhere left to hide the truth. I thought I could slip back inside unnoticed, but I heard footsteps behind me, slow, hesitant. When I turned, it was Mr. Lyle from next door, the man who always watered his garden at sunrise as if the flowers depended on his punctuality. He held his hat in his hands, turning it slowly by the brim, a gesture I'd seen him use at funerals and weddings. Any moment where words felt too heavy to carry plain. "Morning, Claire," he said softly. I nodded. "Morning." He looked at the open trunk, then at the boxes stacked near the doorway. His gaze lingered just long enough to make my chest tighten. Not accusatory. Just confused, maybe. Concerned. "You're heading out soon?" He didn't look at me when he asked. His eyes were on the pavement, like he was asking the ground for permission. I swallowed. "Yeah, almost." He let out a breath that sounded like it had been waiting for years. "Well," he said, "we'll miss having you here." A simple line, but it carried more weight than anything I'd packed so far. There was a quiet pause, long enough for the wind to shift, long enough for me to wonder if he'd say anything else. Then, in a softer voice, he added, "Didn't think you'd really go." He didn't mean harm, but the words landed like a reminder. This wasn't just a house I was leaving. It was the version of myself they all thought they knew. After he walked away, the street seemed to lean even closer, as if waiting to see what I'd do next. A car rolled by slowly, the driver offering a tight-lipped smile that didn't reach his eyes. 2 teenagers on the corner paused mid-conversation, their laughter fading when they noticed me. It felt like standing on a stage without a script. Every move a line, every silence a confession. I sat on the porch steps, letting the sun warm my back. The sounds of the neighborhood rose around me. Distant lawnmower, a barking dog, the soft rustle of leaves. All familiar, all suddenly out of reach. My fingers curled around the edge of the step. The wood was worn smooth from years of feet and weather and life. I used to sit here with a cup of tea, watching the world wake up. Now I was watching it watch me leave. A thought surfaced gently, uninvited but persistent. They're not judging you. They're just trying to understand the shape of your disappearance. But understanding is a fragile thing. People fill the gaps with whatever they can, whispers, half smiles, assumptions. And as I looked at the faces across the street, At the small-town curiosity painted into every expression, I realized something I hadn't allowed myself to see before. This place had memorized me, but had never truly known me. And maybe that was why leaving hurt less than staying. The wind picked up slightly, lifting a corner of flattened cardboard near my feet. The sun had risen fully now, casting long, stretched shadows across the drive. Shadows that looked like paths leading in every direction except backward. A car door slammed somewhere down the block. Someone laughed. Life went on, as it always does. I stood slowly, brushing dust from my hands, and reached for the next box. The street watched, quiet and expectant, but I didn't feel small beneath its gaze anymore. Just visible. As I carried the box inside, I glanced once more at the row of houses, at the neighbors pretending not to look, and I wondered, softly, almost tenderly, how do you let a world watch you break, without letting it decide what broke you? The fire hadn't been lit in months, but I could still smell the ghost of old wood smoke, thin, brittle, like it was holding on to the memory of warmth. I sat on the floor instead of the couch, knees drawn up, staring at the dark hollow of the fireplace. It looked like a mouth that had forgotten how to speak. The house was dim except for a single lamp in the corner, its light soft and tired. Shadows stretched across the rug in long, uneven strokes, almost like they were trying to reach me. Outside, the wind scraped along the siding, patient and restless. Inside, the silence sat beside me, familiar, unblinking, ready to hear whatever I finally dared to say. Nights like this had once been ours. We'd sit with mugs of tea, the glow of the fire dancing across his face, and for a little while, the world felt small enough to hold in my hands. Sometimes he'd laugh, that low, warm sound that cracked something open in me. Other nights, the conversations stretched thin and trembled, as if just one wrong word could unravel everything. But the living room had its own memories. The soft indent on the left cushion where he always sat. The faint ring on the coffee table from a glass placed carelessly during a hurried apology. Even the fireplace remembered the way he'd lean forward, coaxing flames from kindling like he could will warmth into both of us. Now the room felt different. It held its breath when I entered. It watched me with the understanding of a witness who has seen too much. I pulled the blanket around my shoulders, though the cold wasn't what made me shiver. It was the heaviness of everything unsaid, the things I rehearsed in my mind but swallowed in the moment. His excuses, my silence, the small, quiet fractures that turned into a fault line beneath our feet. Tonight, for the first time, I let myself feel all of it. I leaned back against the couch and let the words slip out, barely a whisper, barely a breath. I loved you more than you knew. Saying it felt like touching a bruise. Tender, obvious, already too late. My voice sounded foreign in the room, as if someone else had spoken. The house absorbed it, tucking the confession into the same corners where dust and regrets gather, without asking permission. I closed my eyes and saw us again, standing by the fireplace after that argument about nothing, the one that spiraled into everything. He'd run his hands through his hair, the way he did when frustration boiled over. I'd cross my arms, pretending I wasn't scared of losing him, pretending I wasn't already feeling the ground shift. But then I remembered the quieter moments, the ones that made the betrayal sting deeper. Like how he'd kiss the top of my head when he thought I was half asleep. Or how he'd reach for my hand under the table during dinner with friends, a small secret connection no one else could see. Those memories felt like tiny lights flickering inside a room that had already gone dark. And then, softer still, I whispered, I wasn't enough, was I? The silence didn't argue. It didn't comfort. It simply held the question, letting it settle in the air like dust motes drifting through lamplight. After a while, the quiet inside me loosened. Something shifted, not forgiveness, not anger, just the truth rising to the surface with its own quiet gravity. I opened my eyes and looked at the fireplace again. The soot along the brick looked like fingerprints, smudged black against red clay. Marks left by fires that had burned too bright, too hot, too long. Some endings don't ask permission, I murmured. My voice trembled, but the words felt steady.
Real.
Outside, the wind scratched at the windows again. Long, slow strokes, like a stray branch signaling that the world beyond these walls was moving on, even if I hadn't yet. I let out a breath I didn't realize I'd been holding. He had left long before he walked out. In the way he avoided my eyes. In the clipped goodnights. In the sudden, careful politeness between us. Two people tiptoeing around the truth.
And I
had stayed long after I knew I shouldn't. Stayed out of hope, habit, fear. The way a person stays beside a dying fire, believing warmth might return even when all that's left is ash. The realization settled into me gently, as if it had been waiting for the right moment to speak. The betrayal was loud in memory. Yes, but the ending had been quiet. Quiet enough to miss until now. I drew my knees closer, listening to the wind, the ticking of the cooling radiators, the faint hum of a world that didn't pause for heartbreak. The living room felt softer somehow, not forgiving, just honest. I whispered one last truth into the dim light. I think I'm finally ready to stop holding on. The house didn't echo it back. It simply let the words drift upward, like smoke from a fire that had burned itself out. I stood slowly, the blanket slipping from my shoulders, and took one last look at the empty fireplace. Some endings don't slam doors. Some don't shatter anything at all. Some just sit with you in the quiet until you realize you've already stepped into whatever comes next. The first set of footsteps arrived before the doorbell even finished echoing. Light hesitant, like someone stepping into a church instead of a house. I stood at the edge of the hallway, fingers resting on the banister, watching shadows move across the frosted glass of the front door. When it opened, the afternoon sun poured in behind them. A couple, maybe mid-30s, their silhouettes framed in warm gold. Their voices drifted into the entryway, soft but intrusive, as if they were afraid to disturb the stillness, yet still eager to claim it. The house, usually so quiet it pressed against my skin, suddenly felt filled with new breath. And I wasn't sure if it comforted me or cracked something open. I hadn't expected to feel protective. After weeks of packing, of stripping the rooms down to the barest versions of themselves, I thought the detachment would come easier. But watching strangers step across the threshold felt like someone flipping through the pages of my journal with careless, curious fingers. The real estate agent walked in behind them, offering her practiced smile, the kind that had reassurance polished into every corner. She greeted me with a gentle nod, as though acknowledging wounds she was too polite to name. "Mind if we take a look around?" she asked, already knowing the answer. I stepped back and gestured toward the living room. My voice felt stuck somewhere behind my ribs, but I managed a simple, "Of course." The couple moved slowly, taking in the framed windows, the curve of the archway, the way the light pooled on the hardwood floors as if it had settled there for years. I followed at a distance, close enough to hear their whispers, but far enough that I wasn't included. It felt like watching people wander through memories I wasn't finished with yet. The woman paused at the fireplace, running her hand along the mantel with the kind of tenderness usually reserved for old trees and family heirlooms. "I love this," she murmured. A small, unexpected ache pulsed through me. I'd stood in that same spot countless nights, sometimes wrapped in a blanket, sometimes wrapped in his arms, sometimes alone with only embers to keep me company. Her partner drifted toward the kitchen, his footsteps stirring the dust motes as though waking them from sleep. "This layout is nice," he said. "Feels open." I knew that openness. I had filled it with birthday candles and rushed weekday breakfasts and arguments that felt like storms breaking loose in the same half-lit morning. They opened cabinet doors, peered into closets, tested light switches. Every click felt louder than it should, as if each small sound pressed against my chest. The agent spoke in her warm, practiced cadence, describing the age of the house, the updates we had made, the spaces that lived beautifully. I watched the buyer's eyes glimmer with interest, envy, hope, all the things we had once brought into this space. Every step they took felt like an invitation to let go, and a challenge not to. We made our way upstairs, their voices bouncing softly off the walls I had once painted with such certainty. They lingered in the primary bedroom longer than anywhere else. The woman stood near the window, gazing out at the maple tree whose branches brushed the glass during every storm. Her partner opened the closet, the same one where his shirts once hung in a neat row, and where I had buried my doubts between stacks of folded sweaters. "It's bigger than I expected," he said. I swallowed. I had said those very words the day we moved in, laughing, breathless, hopeful. Suddenly, I wasn't just watching strangers tour my house. I was watching a story begin, right inside the one I had just finished. And something in me loosened. Maybe a house wasn't meant to be held any more tightly than water cupped in your palm. Maybe it belonged to the people who filled it, and when they left, it simply waited for the next hands to hold it gently. I looked around at the empty dresser space, the sunlight spilling across the floorboards, the faint outline of where our bed had once pressed into the rug. This room wasn't mine anymore. Not really. But for the first time, that thought didn't feel like a loss. It felt like an opening. When the couple finally walked back downstairs, their footsteps sounded less intrusive and more like the whisper of a story turning its next page. At the door, the agent thanked me. The buyers gave polite smiles, hopeful, shy, already imagining themselves inside these walls. When the door closed behind them, the silence returned. But it wasn't heavy this time. It wasn't waiting to swallow me. It felt spacious. I walked to the center of the living room and let my hand rest on the mantel one last time. The wood was warm from their touch. "Maybe you're ready," I whispered to the house, unsure whether I meant the walls or myself. Outside, the wind carried off the last of their voices. Inside, I took my first deep breath in a very long time. The house was quieter than I'd ever heard it, as if it knew this would be our last evening together. The sunset came in low and gentle, brushing the walls with a color I'd never noticed before, something between peach and forgiveness. I stood in the hallway with my coat still on, listening to the old floor breathe under my feet. It felt like the house was waiting for me to move, to start the ritual of goodbye.
And I did.
Not because I was ready, but because the light was fading and I didn't want to say farewell in the dark. I walked slowly toward the living room, each step sounding softer than usual, like the floorboards had decided not to make this harder than it needed to be. Dust floated in the air, glowing gold as it drifted across the path of the setting sun. Funny how something so ordinary could look sacred when you knew it wouldn't be yours anymore. I paused by the window, the one that had leaked every winter since we moved in. We used to shove a folded towel in the gap, joking that the house was crying again. I touched the sill now, running my thumb over the raised paint and tiny chips. It felt smaller than I remembered, or maybe I was finally seeing it without the weight of hope. The kitchen smelled faintly of the lemon cleaner I'd used that morning, but beneath it lingered the older scents: coffee beans, burnt toast, his cologne caught in the wood grain of the cabinets. They rose around me like ghosts that weren't trying to haunt me anymore, just reminding me they'd been real. I breathed in slowly, let the air settle in my chest, and felt a strange calmness wrap around me. Leaving wasn't a punishment now. It was the release I hadn't trusted myself to want. The hallway felt longer tonight. I let my fingers trail against the wallpaper, the same wallpaper I once hated for being too busy. Now, its little roses felt like friendly faces watching me pass. I opened the door to our old bedroom. The sunset stretched across the floor in long, narrow ribbons, touching the edge of the closet door, the foot of the bed frame, and the corner where he used to toss his shoes. For a moment, I just stood there, letting the colors pull me in. I walked to the dresser, placing my palm on the wood. It was cool, smooth, familiar. This was where I'd kept letters, jewelry, and all the things too sentimental to be practical. Now it sat empty, drawers yawning open like they were exhaling the last of our years. I whispered something, I don't even remember what. Just a soft sound meant only for me and the room. It felt like the walls listened without judgment. As I stepped back into the hallway, something shifted inside me. The grief didn't sting the way it had before. It was softer, rounded at the edges, like a bruise that had finally begun to fade. I moved into the smallest room last, the one we'd never known what to do with. It had been a storage room, then an office, then a place for laundry baskets when neither of us felt like sorting anything. Now it was empty, except for a sliver of sunlight resting on the far wall. I stepped into it, feeling its warmth on my face, and something inside me loosened. This was the room where we fought once. A quiet fight, the kind where two people pretend everything is fine until the silence gets too loud. I remembered standing near the window, arms crossed, heart tight. I remembered him sighing, running a hand through his hair, not meeting my eyes. We were both so tired back then, tired of pretending the house could hold us together. Tonight the memory felt distant, softened by the evening light. I touched the wall where my shadow stretched long and thin. It felt peaceful, like even the hard memories belonged here, but didn't belong to me anymore. I realized then that I wasn't mourning the house. I was thanking it for holding the years I couldn't carry, for keeping the pieces of me I'd lost along the way until I was ready to take them back. When I returned to the kitchen, the light had thinned into a quiet blue. I placed the key on the counter, the same counter where we'd shared late dinners, early coffees, and all the small moments that somehow mattered more than the big ones. The metal clicked softly against the surface. A tiny, final sound. I stood there a moment longer, letting the stillness settle around me. Then I turned, walked to the door, and pulled it closed. The latch caught gently, like the house didn't want to make a scene. Outside, the air smelled cool and new. And as I stepped off the porch, I wondered, can a place hold both pain and peace at the same time? I think this one did. And maybe that was enough. The key had clicked in the ignition, the engine humming awake like it was stretching after a long sleep. I pressed my hands to the steering wheel, feeling the leather warm beneath my fingers. Through the windshield, the driveway narrowed in the rearview mirror, the house shrinking until it was just a shape framed by autumn light. The trees on either side flared orange and gold, blurring past as if the world were moving faster than I was ready to. The wind pressed against the car, a constant, whispering companion. And for the first time in a long while, the road ahead felt like mine, not borrowed, not interrupted, not weighed down by what had come before. I exhaled slowly, letting the weight of the house and its memories slide from my shoulders. The scent of the car, leather, faint vanilla air freshener, and the echo of my own breath felt like a small sanctuary. Every mile carried me farther from rooms that had known my grief and my hope, my anger and my longing. I imagined the hallway, the kitchen, the small patch of sunlight on the living room floor, all waiting for someone else now, all breathing someone else's air. I glanced in the rearview mirror again, catching a fleeting image of the driveway, the maple tree, the way the light had caught the last leaves. It felt surreal, like I was peeling a photograph from reality. There was sadness, yes, a quiet ache that lingered at the edges of my ribs. But beneath it was something I hadn't felt in years. Resolve. A calm, steady sense that I could move forward without guilt, without the invisible strings that had bound me to this life, this house, this version of myself. The radio was off, the car filled with the sound of the wind and the tires on the asphalt. In that silence, I began to hear possibilities, softly humming alongside the natural rhythm of the road. I passed the first row of houses and felt a strange sense of liberation. They were familiar shapes, fences I knew by memory, but now they belonged to other people's stories, not mine. I imagined my future unfolding somewhere beyond them, unknown, uncertain, unclaimed. The wind tugged at the edges of my scarf and the hair at my neck. It made the car feel alive, as if it too were saying, "Go on. You belong to yourself now." I turned the corner where we used to drive together, the route we repeated almost unconsciously for years. The memory arrived quietly, uninvited, like an old photograph falling from a drawer. I allowed it to pass without clutching it, letting it drift like leaves caught in the current. Each mile blurred the colors outside into streaks of orange and gold. The light bounced off the hood of the car, and I noticed the way my hands rested differently on the wheel, relaxed but alert, steady but soft. I could feel the stretch of the road, the weight of it beneath the tires, the promise in each bend that I had not yet reached the end. And in the rhythm of passing scenery, I realized I had been holding onto more than the house. I had been holding onto a story that was finished. And now, with every mile, I was writing a new one, quietly, intentionally, entirely my own. At the crest of a small hill, I slowed, letting the wind press against the windows like a gentle reminder of how far I had come. The horizon stretched endlessly, soft with haze, a pale promise that the world was bigger than any one home, any one heartbreak. I thought of all the times I had imagined freedom, but it had always been tethered to what I had lost. Now, for the first time, it was tethered only to what I could become. The empty road ahead was a mirror of my own heart, scarred by history, yes, but wide and waiting, ready to hold something new. The feeling was fragile, almost startling in its clarity, like sunlight suddenly spilling into a room long closed. I realized that endings are not just closures, they are openings disguised as departures. The ache of leaving the house, the memory of him, the years we shared, all of it had brought me here, but none of it would dictate the next chapter. I felt a quiet smile tug at my lips, the kind that comes not from joy, not yet, but from recognition, that I was allowed to step forward without apology, without looking back. The autumn trees blurred past again, faster now, but I didn't mind. I could feel the wind and the road guiding me, steady and alive. I glanced in the mirror one last time. The house was gone. Just a memory etched in light and shadow, shrinking into distance. The tires hummed on the asphalt, a lullaby and a heartbeat all at once. Somewhere ahead, the road bent, disappeared into woods and fields I hadn't yet touched. The air smelled faintly of damp leaves and cold promise. I leaned back slightly, letting the seat cradle me, feeling both the weight of what I'd left behind and the lift of what awaited. No one had claimed this next stretch, not yet. It was unmarked, untamed, entirely mine. And in that quiet, as the sun dipped lower behind the hills, I understood the strange truth of departure. To arrive somewhere new, sometimes all you have to do is drive.